for households with school children. So we're permanently closing the homework gap in North Carolina. Next slide, please. And again, I wanted to also quickly outline the funding levels we received through the long session budget from the American Rescue Plan. It's $970 million for infrastructure spending, largely tied to the state's existing GREAT grant program and a new completing access to broadband program that will allow us to partner directly with counties in a competitive bidding process to fill in gaps where the providers haven't gone to this point. I'll also highlight the broadband pole replacement fund that will be used to reimburse communication providers that update their infrastructure, their utility poles in service of a larger broadband project. And we received $50 million for the next 4 years of work for digital literacy as well. Next slide, please. I mentioned the GREAT grants first. It's the one that we launched first, and we received applications on May 4th, 305 applications to cover 94 of the state's 100 counties. We're very pleased with this level of demand. There were a number of policy concerns and supply chain issues that I think gave us cause for concern about how much buy-in we'd see from the internet provider community around these programs, but we're thrilled with the level of response. Applications proposed to serve nearly or address nearly $1.8 billion worth of broadband projects across the state, and to serve nearly 500,000 locations, about 470,000 households. Now, several caveats with this information. One, many applications, or at least some applications, are applying or proposing to cover the same households, right? So there are numerous households that are double counted, right? But this is just an aggregate level of demand, right? We also are in the process, or in the middle of the process, for public posting and protest for these grant applications. We're wrapping that up Sunday. That is a process that's defined by statute to give providers the chance to say this application proposes to direct state funding or public funding to areas that we're already serving, right? And we want to prioritize unserved areas. So we know that protests will cut out some of these household numbers as well. The other thing I should point out is this $1.8 billion worth of projects comes with an assumed state match of nearly $900 million, and we've only got a $350 million pot, right? So all these dots are not going to get funded in this GREAT grant round. But I think the important point is we're going to be able to take a tremendous chunk out of the unserved households in North Carolina over the next couple of years, just from this first tranche of funding, right? Just from the GREAT grant process. And we'll have additional funding programs coming down the pike and additional federal funding headed our way as well. I should point out, if you're interested, we've also got county by county breakdowns of these applications. So you can send me a note offline if you're looking for more information about where applications are. Just remember those caveats that I mentioned, right? When you're looking and getting excited about the progress locally. Next slide, please. I already mentioned the level of demand for GREAT grant. Like I said, the protest process closes Sunday evening, so we will resume scoring and review those protests Monday morning first thing. Our goal is to award the bulk of this $350 million pot in July. As soon as that's done, we'll begin the second tranche of funding, which is completing access to broadband. It's $400 million in ARPA funds intended to match county, state, and local fiscal recovery funds and allow us to go directly to the market with an RFP to address areas that the county and the state jointly identify as unserved or underserved. So we'll be incorporating new households into this program that weren't previously eligible. For your record, for your information, we are every household that doesn't have access to 25 megabits per second download speed and 3 megabits per second upload speed is defined by state law as unserved. We will begin counting everything between that 25.3 number and 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload as underserved, right? Because we don't want the Great Grant program to knock out nearly all the unserved households and then have a whole lot of North Carolinians who are stuck between 25.3 and speeds that aren't quite sufficient to allow full participation in the modern economy, right? So our top priority will always be addressing those unserved households, but we're going to start bringing more North Carolina locations into eligibility for these investments in the very near future. We are finalizing program guidance, part 1 of 2 for program guidance for the CAB program to be posted for public comment next week, and have hired a program manager, Jeff Brooks, who joins us from the private sector, and will be ready to launch later this year. 2 notes that I'd mention here for your awareness: we're building a convenience contract that will pre-qualify providers that are interested in and able to serve each county, so that as we go through that mapping exercise with the county to identify unserved and underserved areas, they can go directly to this convenience contract, issue a statement of work to the 4 or 6 or however many providers that have infrastructure present or trying to install infrastructure in that county, just to expedite that process. The other thing we can do is, under state law, is present counties at the beginning of this process with unfunded Great Grant applications from their county and say, look, you can go through the RFP process, or you can bless this unfunded Great Grant application that would address another 1,000 households, right? So we'll be able to show progress quickly within that CAB program. I assume many counties will choose to go through that competitive process because at the end of the day, Great Grant applications come from the providers to us proposing to serve areas they want to serve, right? Not areas that we necessarily need served most. So we'll see how that goes, but it's another option to help us make an impact locally more quickly, more effectively.
So Nate, if I might ask, how?
Yes, sir.
Give me a little bit more, I guess, clarification in how the Great Grant part and the CAB part, you're not going to end up overlapping, right? I mean, the counties will know what the service providers have already agreed to do, such that they can supplement and not duplicate what's already getting put in.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And that's one of the reasons we can't run these 2 programs concurrently, right? We need to see what Great Grant demand looks like. Any area that has received a state or a federal award for expansion of broadband infrastructure comes off the map, right? So eligible areas, whether unserved or underserved, will be those that remain, right? That don't have an active or ongoing project, and the people who live in those areas don't have access to the technology speeds that they need. So great question, and you're right. That's an important safeguard for our use of public funds, right? To make sure that we're not spending money where someone is already doing the work. Thank you for that. Just a couple of other highlights here. One, our more than $1 billion appropriation from Session Law 2021-180 includes North Carolina's entire $273 million allocation from the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, another ARPA pot that sits beside the state and local fiscal recovery fund. We have to go get that money though, right? State and local fiscal recovery funds came straight to the state. We have to go and grab the Capital Projects Fund resources from U.S. Treasury. This actually says submitted yesterday. It's going to be submitted today. We ran into one snag, but by the end of business today, we will have that application into U.S. Treasury. We also are in the process of posting a program manager for the pole replacement program, who will administer those reimbursements to internet providers and other pole owners upgrading to help execute a broadband project. And next week, we will issue a draft request for proposals for our own implementation partner for this billion-dollar program. As you know, the Broadband Infrastructure Office has been and still is pretty small. We don't have all the capacity in-house to execute these programs. We'll be bringing on a partner to help with a number of areas, but especially risk management. And as I've said to this group before, we take really seriously our role as a steward of taxpayer dollars, of public resources, and we will be bringing on a partner to help us with monitoring of grants and grant integrity, program evaluation, federal compliance, and other issues, so that when either the state auditor, the General Assembly, U.S. Treasury, or U.S. Commerce Inspector Generals performs their necessary oversight over our use of these funds, we will be ready and have already held ourselves accountable for both strong management of funds and program resources as well. As I mentioned, Annette Taylor is on the team as our Director of Digital Equity, and her team is standing up our device support program to help get more laptops and tablets into low-income households, and our community grant program. I mentioned Maggie Woods joining the team, who's helping build that new grant program now. We hope to have strong announcements on both of those programs by the next time this board meets. Next slide. The Digital Equity Office is also responsible for making sure as many North Carolinians as are eligible know to participate in the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is the $30 a month discount for low-income households on internet service. I share this slide because North Carolina's already got 480,000 enrollees in that program getting that discount from their internet provider, but we believe, based on the overlapping criteria for that for eligibility for that program, that the eligible number of North Carolinians is probably closer to 3.5 million people. So we've got a lot of work to do, and you'll see from this chart by county, we've got a lot of work to do in rural parts of the state. So we're in the process of better mapping eligibility at a local level so that we can track our signups and figure out where we need to concentrate our outreach. Next slide. This is a federal funding bipartisan infrastructure law summary that I believe I've shared with this board before, but I want to highlight two of these programs. The Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which is a $42 billion formula grant to every state and territory for infrastructure, and the three digital equity programs at the bottom, the first of which is the Digital Equity Planning Grant Program. If you go to the next slide, we were very pleased that Secretary Raimondo from U.S. Department of Commerce and the entire National Telecommunication and Information Administration senior team came to North Carolina to announce their notices of funding opportunity for both of these programs and for the Middle Mile Competitive Grant Program. They came here on Friday, May 13th, and by Monday, a couple of days later, we had our letter of intent submitted to the BEAD program for that infrastructure funding. So our direction from the governor and from the General Assembly is to maximize North Carolina's share of these federal resources to make sure we're bringing everything home that we can. Annette's team on the digital equity side is also working on finalizing an application for digital equity planning funds to help build a 5-year digital equity plan. Again, on that front and on the infrastructure side, we really benefit from the work that the governor and the General Assembly have directed tied to the American Rescue Plan work already. I think we've got all the tools and the right team in place to execute on the ARPA work and maximize our share of these additional federal funds. I also want to highlight that internet providers have to submit new, more specific data to the FCC for the FCC's updated maps in September. These maps will inform our actual share of that $42 billion program, 10% of which goes to high-cost hardest to address areas of the state, and the rest is determined by a formula share of the nation's unserved households. we don't know yet. We'll find out probably end of this year, early next. But we believe that our share will be minimum $700 or $800 million out of that BEAD program on top of our ARPA funding. So we really will be able to direct to achieve the bipartisan infrastructure law's directive of making sure every household in North Carolina has a high-speed internet connection. So I've gone through an implementation update very, very quickly. I'm happy to take any questions or dig into any of these bullets with a little more depth if it's useful to the board. But I really appreciate your time, and I'm happy to come talk through this work with members of the board whenever is convenient, in this setting or individually, for what it's worth.
Nate, we appreciate the update. Thanks very much. So, Julie, where do we go next?
Tracy has a question.
Yeah, sorry, always a question. It's such an important topic. I just wanted to check, Nate. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to hear about the work you're doing with the great grants and how do we map where the applications are and also identify the overlap. Have you thought about, now that you've got these new mapping resources, a way to have either a dashboard or a look at where that overlap exists? I hear you that you will prioritize the projects that deliver to the non-served areas, but finding a way to kind of be transparent about that and share it with the community seems like it would go a long, long way toward obviating some of the problems that happened in other states last time around when broadband funding was out there and there were concerns about how it got selected, how it got done. So I'm just urging, if there's a way to use your new mapping resources to add a dashboard or transparency on that, that would be great. And I don't know whether you have any, beyond the goal of serving the underserved or getting to the underserved or unserved, if you have any targets for that, right? Our hope is that no more than 5% of the population is kind of double covered, right? Or 30% or whatever it would be, just kind of a way, again, to be explicit about what our goals are and what our deliverables are.
Right. Well, that's a great point. You're absolutely right. That is our goal. We already have, I think, pretty good dashboards available using the NC1 map resource. There's a subsection of NC1 map that after I'm done speaking, I'll make sure you all have the link focused on broadband maps specifically. Now, the limitation to those maps to this point, they've been tied to that census block data that we can get from the FCC. That's what we're trying to push beyond, right? We're trying to get to that location specific household level view. And I think we've got really strong maps with the data that's currently available to us, but we'll be working with each of the internet providers that's submitting new data to the FCC to get that data incorporated into our system as quickly as possible. We also have, and part of our great grant planning process, it makes available for both communities and the internet providers really detailed locations about where federal funding or state funding already exists to try and carve those areas out of eligible areas for applications. So we've already got that in place. We're in the process of updating it to include underserved locations, right? Because right now we've just been focused on the unserved to this point. The other thing I would say is, as I mentioned, we're in the protest process for great grants now. An internet provider that is protesting a great grant application must submit household level location specific data for the areas that they already serve to disqualify those areas from a great grant application. That's one of our key tools to get better data for these maps. You're absolutely right, though. We will, particularly through the CAB process, make sure that every county and the internet provider community that's playing in an individual market has data about what's been invested to this point and our best data about what's truly unserved and underserved.
Hey, Nate, I'm just curious about how many ISPs are involved across our state.
We had, I want to say it was 38 applicants for this current round of Great Grant. I don't have an exact figure for the full amount of ISPs. There are a fair amount of small shops that, so the number shifts from time to time, but I believe it's more than 100 statewide that are
Wow.
serving some addresses in North Carolina.
Wow, I had no idea there were that many. That's interesting.
So Nate, I'm sure that you've made provision that, and sort of following on what Tracy was saying in this whole transparency thing. So in the scenario where funds are granted to a service provider, but for whatever reason, the service provider is unable to fulfill or meet his objectives, are those monies able to go back into the pot to be redistributed? The subsequent, I understand you're not running these projects in parallel, and the reason that you're doing that. And so if there's a provider that falls short, I guess there's a mechanism that can be covered by the subsequent. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I think the most important protection available for this program is that we expend these funds on a reimbursement basis in the first place, right? So we're not taking $3 million to an ISP that's won a grant on the front end and saying, go have fun, right? We execute a 2-year grant agreement with a provider that wins a great grant. They got 2 years to execute the project, and then they start sending us receipts as they do the work, and we do that reimbursement on that basis. We've had a small number, and I don't have the exact figure on the top of my head, but a pretty small number of grantees to this point over the 4 previous rounds of great grant availability who have not been able to complete their projects. And I think all of them have withdrawn voluntarily to this point rather than have their great grant canceled and thus be on the state's do not play list for contracting, right? But we have had a few cases. If they're unable to complete the project, they must reimburse the state for any expenses that they've gotten to this point. So, and I believe all of our withdrawals of awards to this point have been grantees that actually didn't spend any money on the, like they weren't able to make any progress or minimal progress. So we've got those safeguards in place. Excellent question.
Thank you.
All right, so Rocco, if there aren't other questions, the next on the agenda was remarks from Secretary Weaver. As everyone knows, he's stuck on an airplane. And Nate will ask you to introduce Monica Fuller, and if there's any legislative or budget updates you can share with the committee.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you, Julie. And thanks everybody for letting me present on the broadband work as well. Lee Jackson was our other legislative liaison. I am registered as well, but not primarily focused on those duties at this point. Lee left us in the past few weeks to go to the Department of Transportation, and we have been fortunate to bring on Monica Fuller to fill out our legislative team here at DIT. Monica's got a huge amount of experience with the General Assembly, used to work for a state senator over there, and then also was at DOT recently. And so we're very fortunate to have Monica on board, and she has jumped right in on DIT's budget request, on HIE legislation that we're pushing or seeking. And so thank you, Monica, for joining the team. I believe Monica's on the call. Monica, do you want to say anything briefly before I move on?
Yes. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I've been here for a few weeks, but I'm appreciative of all the support that everyone's been able to provide me. This is my first time deep in anything IT, but I'm extremely appreciative of all the support that the agency's provided me to get some of this work done.
Thank you, Monica. Legislative updates we are in, and Monica should chime in here. We are certainly in a waiting game to see what the what budget numbers are released next week, as with everyone else. Our short session request as an agency was fairly limited. I'd be happy to Actually, if Crystal or Nicole or someone from comms can share a link to the relevant section of the governor's budget for information technology, that would be really helpful. But we are just in the same waiting game everyone else is. Hope to have more information next week there. On the broadband front, we don't have any additional asks. We have asked for some cybersecurity funding to be held in reserve as a match for bipartisan infrastructure law cyber funding that will come to the state from the feds. I believe that number is about 7 million for that reserve. But our other real focus in our legislative ask was on our workforce. As all of you know, the Great Resignation is very real. It is something that public entities are facing, just as private entities are. As a public organization that is competing with private sector organizations on technology here in the Triangle, I think it's a particular challenge for us. And so one of our, I'd say our most high priority budget ask is the ability to get our technical team to midpoint on salary range so that we continue to retain and attract talent for the state's technology mission. Monica, anything else we should highlight on the legislative or budget front for members of the board? I will take your silence.
Sorry, I was on. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Hopefully we should see something live mid next week. The General Assembly is planning to adjourn July 1st. And I was told budget-wise that DIT is fine, without going into any details, that we are okay.
That's very reassuring. Any questions on the legislative front from members of the board? If none, then Mr. Chair, I yield back to you.
Okay. So let's see, Julie, we have Tracy, I think you're up next.
Great, thank you. Just one single slide. Just wanted to share status with the group. We've come up with a series of great information shared through Glenn and the team in our interim meeting since the last one. And so we're going to use this perhaps as a way to update everybody in a pretty concise format in the going forward meetings. Basically, our work at this point takes three forms. It all revolves around the digital transformation roadmap that you all saw a little while ago. The first set of activities that we've engaged in the last several months and will continue to do going forward are around tracking the progress on the various roadmap elements. In particular, we've had we've instituted 90-day progress checks, and we've had deeper dives beyond all the roadmap elements into things like the business one-stop shop and the constituent portal. Those have been extremely helpful and quite reassuring to the group and give us a sense of where that progress is occurring and what some of the bottlenecks are. And I'll talk about that in a second. Next up in that regard will be, again, another 90-day progress check plus revisiting some of the elements of both common single sign-on and federated identity. We've found in our subsequent conversations, not only around the business side, but others that I'll talk about in a second, that continues to surface as one of the key underpinnings of everything we need to make progress in digital transformation. So next up, we'll take a little deeper dive into those, as well as chatbot, which we've already talked about in the past. We'll talk a little deeper about that in the next few meetings, and accessibility. DIT is ready to go forward with an RFP, I believe, or an RFI. I don't quite know the detail about accessibility so that we can better ensure that all of our sites and services are fully accessible in a digital means. So those are the next up things in that tracking progress category. And again, those are about the things that you would have heard about in the digital transformation roadmap. The next category of activities revolves around how do we help to promote this? How do we help make the case? How do we help make sure that digital transformation is embraced and accepted and funded for the work that needs to occur there. So we have 3 activities that we've been working on over the last couple of months. One has been double checking on with some of the state communication folks around the digital transformation communications in the state, keeping track of that and seeing where we can be helpful. A second area of effort has been around benchmarking with private sector and others. What exactly does it mean when we're saying we're going to do digital transformation in terms of the personnel costs, the effort that's really involved? So doing some benchmarking to make sure that we are neither below the bar or far above the bar in terms of expectation of what it takes for the resource request that goes along with this. And then the third area of making the case that we've been engaged with in recent months has been talking with other agencies in particular. I have municipalities referenced here, but it's mostly been agencies that we've started to reach out to, and we'll get to that in the next bullet. Next up, in terms of making the case, we intend in that category 2 around benchmarking, we intend to look next at a deeper dive around some of the data on costs, staffing levels, et cetera. We think that will help Secretary Weaver as he goes forward I believe it will be the long session when he makes a request for what it takes to achieve the kind of digital transformation that we have envisioned for the state. The third category, and as you see then this becomes a cycle, right? The third category is to make sure the digital transformation roadmap is really not just DIT, it's beyond that. So we've had some fantastic engagement and conversations in the last couple of months with the Secretary of State, who's actually attended the Secretary of State's office. Bill Toole from there has actually attended 2 meetings with us. The first one to share some broad level of insights about what digital transformation might mean and how we start to incorporate areas that are underway in his operation and others. And then the second conversation we had just recently this month was with the Secretary of State around particular transformation efforts. So we now have the data we need from him to make sure we can reflect Secretary of State activities in the digital transformation roadmap, again, one step beyond DIT. Likewise, we had a fantastic meeting with DMV and the Department of Transportation around some of their transformation efforts, heard about work around digital driver's license, heard about the use of Pay It. You may recall, depending on how steeped you were in the digital transformation roadmap, both of those were areas that we cited as needing some near-term attention and effort. And so it was really fantastic to hear what is already underway and where those things actually mesh up with DIT. Particularly pleasing to the ear for some of us was that although Department of Transportation started with the Pay It relationship, they've now assigned, so to speak, that contract over to DIT. So DIT can now manage Pay It, which is the online payment program that's used for driver's license and other things. They can now manage that on behalf of the state, and it will really help toward one of our underlying goals in the roadmap, which is to get common solutions working all the way across the board for multiple agencies. So that work continues, and we also heard about the digital driver's license effort, which likewise is very interesting. There are 6 or so states that are already doing a digital driver's license, and it's clear that there's work underway within Department of Transportation and DMV to get North Carolina on that list. So this is great news and status. Next up for the group will be to try to start to integrate what we heard as particular projects into the roadmap, again, with that overall goal that the roadmap is not just DIT efforts, it reflects all the state agencies and efforts. So let me stop there. You can see, again, with this cycle, that as we do these things and ensure the roadmap is statewide and add those to the roadmap, we will then be able to think about those in our ongoing progress reports and add tracking on those. So we're encouraged about where things are going and encouraged about the prospect. I've said it's not a secret or hidden agenda, but I'm hopeful that some of the representatives who sat in on our last 2 calls or last call from Secretary of State's office and from Department of Transportation and DMV, they might join this digital transformation committee as regular attendees, because again, our goal is to have this be as broad and far reaching as we can, because all of these things relate to one another, and siloed successes are really not successes. So with that, let me stop. I see Monica has a hand raised, and maybe see if we have a few more time for a couple questions before I get the hook. Monica?
Yes, the mobile ID efforts, that's something that me and Tori had worked on when we were at DOT. And I just want everyone to be mindful that there are 3 companies that, with the exception of Apple, that are working to push, that want to break into the North Carolina market for mobile ID. One of the ones that DMV was pushing for was Louisiana Wallet. And I just want everyone to be mindful that the group that has been aggressively pursuing North Carolina also charges $23 per person to have access to it. I have been in deep conversations with Apple, TSA, Department of Homeland Security, Utah, Arizona. It's actually 10 states as of this year. We've all been in constant communication, even on the weekends, just to say hey to each other. And it is definitely something that I think DIT needs to be involved in with the efforts of mobile ID. It's a great, I think it's a great thing to have. And as of now, I believe TSA said that they should have an update on the use of mobile ID for security purposes at the airport sometime this year. But we will continue to be in constant communications on the DIT side with all the stakeholders and the governor's office with mobile ID.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Monica.
And I'm sorry, I didn't have my hand raised. This is Tori Jessup, COO here at DIT and previous DMV commissioner. Want to add to what Monica's saying. When we're talking about TSA PreCheck or TSA's relationship with DMVs across the country, this is really important because in 2023, the Real ID enforcement deadline, I'm gonna call it a deadline, but I call it an enforcement date to be more clear, is coming up in 2023. There are quite a few opportunities to from a digital transformation standpoint with mobile ID to be able to issue real IDs remotely and without having citizens to come in or the public to come into the driver's license office, which is really important. That's something that I pushed for with the Real ID Modernization Act of 2020 when I was commissioner. So, when we're looking at the applications that can provide mobile ID, and I'm careful to call it mobile ID and not mobile driver's license, because this is also about having a digital identity. And digital identity can go a long way in terms of not just having a really cool application on your phone that serves as a driver's license, but it is also a way for, as we bring more North Carolinians into the digital economy through, I guess, Nate's efforts, that we make sure that they are conducting business in that digital economy in a very safe and secure way. So, lots of broad conversations that I think need to assure that there is good collaboration in every aspect of how we utilize identity, because it's not just the driver's license, it is citizen identity too. So.
Great points, Tori. And it really goes to the reason that next up for our committee, one of the things we want to return to is a deeper conversation around identity, around federated identity, around all those aspects. What you described is some of what we heard yesterday on the call. How do I present my digital certificate of who I am, my certification of who I am, and not have it display information that it shouldn't, right? Nobody wants to show your address if you're carded to get into a bar or a restaurant or buy something at the liquor store. You may not want your driver's license number or your address shown to that. You just need some authenticity to reinforce you are, who you say you are. So yeah, those are all great points and quite central to this effort. Other questions or other comments from my my committee colleagues?
No, great job summarizing, Tracy.
All right then. No other questions? Then Jeff, I think you're up.
All right, thank you, Rocco, and good morning, everybody. First, quick comment with Monica Fuller coming on. I do want to recognize her to the committee. She is going to be a tremendous resource. She's got deep academic credentials. You would classically say overqualified to be doing what we're doing, but brilliant background from that perspective. And also, she is someone who understands the processes and the rhythms of the legislature, which will be a tremendous resource for us and Nate with you guys and the team. One thing that I did want to bring to everyone's attention that Monica raised with us or made us aware of today, and it's something that discuss offline between meetings, is to determine whether it's something the oversight board should be, in a sense, the camel's nose under the tent. But there's some of you may be aware, a number of state buildings are looking to be sold, demolished, rebuilt, lease arrangements, what have you. But one of the buildings that's scheduled or slated to potentially be deconstructed also houses one of the state's data centers. So not that I'm totally confident DIT has this in plans, but how we coordinate this with other agencies in the legislatures is to ensure there's a business continuity plan in place, there's a transition plan in place, and more importantly, with something sometimes we've been reticent in the past, but some kind of analysis on the front end to determine whether we should even be rebuilding a data center, or as I like to say, you know, if you're not in the business of running a data center now, perhaps you shouldn't be doing it in the future. And is this an opportunity to consider a migration to a cloud-based environment and not reopen another data center? And I don't know the answer, because that answer would need to be determined based on a number of factors, cost and security and a number of things. But it's something I think the committee needs to be aware of, and perhaps something in a polite fashion, determining what Secretary Weaver suggests and so forth. We might be well served to have that on our radar to be participating in. So with that said, on to what we're all about today in the Cybersecurity Committee. Some of you, if you've been looking at some of the background information, are working on a couple of initiatives where we've narrowed our focus and attention. We've got mission value statements in place. One is the cybersecurity education pathways, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. And the other initiative, which has got, it's kind of the secondary priority, is a whole of state approach to looking at cybersecurity from state level interaction down through our counties and municipalities and addressing weakest link in that status. What we're looking to do with the education pathways at this point is to formalize it and operationalize it, maybe is the easiest way to describe it. And that what we're looking to do is actually, in a sense, create more of a project structure around this to move it forward. And in that regard, to actually create a project charter, we're looking at identifying and selecting a program manager / project manager for this initiative as we roll forward. What I want to do today, there's two people who kind of co-own this initiative internally, being the names you see with Patrick Fleming from the community college system, the CIO, and Keith Werner from the former state CIO, as well as leading it from the UNC system perspective. So what I'm going to do is, Patrick's got another board meeting internally within the community college, a number of trustees on site that he's dealing with this morning. So I'm going to pass the baton and let Keith describe in more detail what we're looking to accomplish with this initiative. So Keith, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Wanted to just take a quick moment and just thank everybody for their hard work. And I can say that Patrick and I have been working very diligently on this project, just trying to get it to a good coordinating point. And I'll kind of step back on that one here in just a moment. But Frankly, we've been rallying around our mission statement, which is to recruit, educate, and graduate certified cybersecurity professionals and retain their services in North Carolina by way of continuing education, internships, apprenticeships, and the full-time employment with the state's public and private sector employees. So with that, Patrick and I have convened a couple of separate meetings with our academic and curriculum folks. So I think we have a really good inventory of what our curriculums look like, what our credentials look like, what our degrees look like, and we have a much better idea of what those onboarding for the students looks like, as well as, you know, when they might want to offboard. I can say both from the community college system as well as the university system, those cybersecurity specific programs are only growing. I think just within the university system, I think there's 2 more that are slated to come out this calendar year. So I think we're seeing pretty aggressive movement in that front. As Jeff indicated, we are, I think, at that point now where we need that coordinating resource. Rob Main is working internally at DIT to get an assigned PM for us to specifically build out the charter, develop that project plan, assist us with a communication strategy, develop the process diagrams of how we actually move, interns through, our educational system to placement. So I think there's still a lot to do, but I think we're at a really good point where having that PM assigned is really going to assist us. So Jeff, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I know that's a rather brief update this morning, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, and I will just chime in and add a couple things that, it's going to be critical, and we're getting great response back from participation from the 58 community college system and the 16 university systems and how they participate. But we're looking on a broadband approach, pardon the pun, in that it's not just for incoming students, from high school matriculating into community college or 4 years, but it's people who may be in adult education or transitioning. How do we address the military that are coming back and ready to retire from military service, et cetera? How do we coordinate with them? But also, as we look at internships, how do we do this within the state government and the agencies that need cyber support, as well as involving our business community and large corporations? Another partnership we see grabbing and holding hands with will be NC Tech, because they have over 600 tech organizations from all the big boys down to smaller niche players, and how they participate and help guide us in this. One of the things we're looking is how we build out metrics around this and monitor that we're giving it more than lip service, but actually filling positions and internships. But also, I think the last number I saw, and you guys may have more current or better information, is that we had 21,000 open cyber positions in the state of North Carolina alone. And by 2023, we're looking at over 2 million open positions across the nation. So maybe a little bit of a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal is to state that North Carolina wants to become the source for the top talent. Where we end up doing like Coach Krzyzewski and Duke, is that we don't recruit talent, we pick talent because they all want to come here and play for North Carolina, and that the state, DIT, gets to be the first rung of where the depth and breadth of types of services we're doing, people want to be here first before they go back into the private sector. So with that, I'll turn it back. If there's questions for Keith, he will be the one to ask. All right, we've solved the cyber education in North Carolina, it looks like. So with that, Rocco, we're going to turn it back to the chair.
Well, okay, Jeff, appreciate that. Appreciate the update and the hard work that everyone's doing. At this point, we are at the point to open the floor for other business. Any board members have anything they want to bring up, a new topic that we might want to discuss? Fire away.
I don't have a new topic. I just would like to make a comment on the previous topic, which is I would love to get continued updates on that. I think that it's certainly a concern of the state, but also, private sector business all across North Carolina and nationally. So I would really love to see us attack that in earnest. That would be awesome. And also happy to help. If there's anything we can do. I have a tremendous CISO in my organization who is actually quite social, believe it or not. So if there's an opportunity for him to get involved and help, I know he would be delighted to do so.
And Mr. Chair, if I can respond to Joe. Everybody is welcome to kind of cross-pollinate both groups from the Digital Transformation Committee and the Cyber. You're not constrained to participating in one group. And also, if you have CISOs, particularly in your organizations, that you would like to participate, we're doing monthly meetings. So we can get the details, and we've added people as we've gone along that have an interest, and having people out of the organizations that the current members of the Oversight Board represent would be a tremendous asset to the working activities of the committee. So to an extent, all are welcome.
That's great. Jeff, maybe, I don't know if you could shoot me a note after the meeting, and I'd be happy to make the connection to Rick, our CISO. I know he would love to participate.
That'd be awesome. Look forward to it.
Okay, then, if there are no other questions or anyone has a comment, we may be prepared to finish up a little early.
I guess my only comment in jest, Rocco, would be whether you can start to facilitate all my meetings if you can make them be only 60% of the scheduled time. So nice job.
Amen to that.
Looks like our next meeting is September 16. And with that, folks, I think we'll wrap it up.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.